Like as soon as the first person picked off, it's like too late.
That's why you gotta turn your name tag around. Put it in your shirt. No, that's cheating.
How you gonna do?
No, you have to have your clothespin showing all the time.
Your clothespin showing. There's anything about your name tag. That was not in the rule.
Hey, we got the signal that we're ready to get started. I think before we do anything, it would make sense for us to put the desks in something like a horseshoe shape, so that this way everybody can see everybody else, which means that if you're sort of already on the outside, you're probably good, and otherwise, let's do some cherry tables, so this way everybody can see each other.
I'm just trying to
Hey, and if the wheels are locked on anything, it makes it hard to move. I don't have my lock.
What are you doing? I'm so confused.
Yeah, I think we're alright.
I guess we're going up further out. I'm up against the wall.
I know.
I can't move.
There's a thing behind me.
Here's a tripod behind you.
Oh, I see.
Makes sense.
There's gum.
That's gross. Looks like Hey, how was this morning so far?
Good.
That was good. Yeah. If you wanted, you could even move in a little bit if you feel like you're too close to the wall. You don't feel too close to the wall. You're okay. I would feel too close to the wall. Just... Okay. Hi. Everybody's comfortable. I'm Jesse Cavallo. I'm a faculty member in English here at Maryville. I think I know two of you. Hi. Hi. And we're going to talk today about mentoring relationships between students and faculty. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Luis Castro. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am this year's Latinx Student Alliance president, and I'm a second year RA too.
Evening.
Sure.
So the idea is that as a student at Maryville, you'll often need to, sometimes because you're put together with somebody, but sometimes even because you want to, form mentoring relationships with faculty members. And I think a lot of the time students imagine that the bulk of that relationship falls on the faculty member. So the idea behind this session is really to focus on what can you as a student do to find and then cultivate those relationships based on what's within your control, as opposed to deferring to the faculty member to set the agenda, make meetings, make all this decisions, and really to see for students the way in which a mentoring relationship or a mentor-mentee relationship with a faculty member really is much more of a two-way street, and it's something that arguably both people should get something out of, as opposed to that it's just the faculty member's job. That I think faculty members often are trying to learn and grow and become better at all sorts of things, and mentoring students is one way that faculty members can do that also. I'm also going to use the word mentee to talk about the person who is receiving mentoring, even though I do want to state up front that I don't like that word. The strictly speaking word that should be is protege, but people never use that word anymore. I think that was a Mazda a couple of years ago, so now people associate that with a car that is discontinued. So it's mentor protege, but nobody uses that except me, so we'll just go with mentor-mentee. As a way to get started, I thought we could talk a little bit about what some of your own experiences with mentoring might have been, and then we'll move on to other things. And I also thought Luis would share some of his experiences as a student leader who's been both a mentor and a mentee. I'll turn that over to you.
So, as a sophomore, I was the mentee under Uli Zuniga. He was president during my sophomore year. So I kind of just worked with him, and then he taught me how to be a leader on campus. He would teach me what he would do as LSA's president. He would tell me, this is what I do, this is how I run the meetings, and then just really tell me, hey, if you can do this, it'll give you a little learning experience for LSA. So for the entire year, I worked with him to really prepare myself to be LSA's next president eventually. And so now as the current president, I'm working with my new exec board, and then it's a really young team, so I have to really help them, mature and grow as leaders. So whenever they have troubles, they come to me and I help them and make sure I'm helping them grow as not only individuals but as leaders as well too. it's sort of been like my experience as a student leader so far.
Okay, thanks. So we pulled from the dictionary the definition of mentor, and this is the part where you're going to start participating. So if you need to take deep breaths before you share or participate, you can do that. If you need to sort of get ready. From here on, all of the session is going to be participatory and interactive, so it'll be important for people to jump in. We've got this noun, an experienced and trusted advisor, and then a bunch of synonyms: advisor, guide, confidant, counselor, consultant, therapist. It strikes me as though, I don't know if everybody can see that, let's see if I can zoom in. It strikes me as though in many ways, those synonyms are not really synonyms. That mentoring is something somewhat different from all of those things. And I wanted you to jump in here. In what ways might a mentor be some of those things, but also not necessarily quite those things? What do you see here that helps us to understand what a mentor is? But synonym-wise, those aren't quite right. They overlap and they have certain things that they can help us understand, but it's hard to define. What do you want to jump in? What are you seeing? And you can, if you want to state your name first.
My name is Tristan, and I'm on Go Saints. I'm the Goose Cup coordinator this year. And well, the synonyms for mentor, a lot of them are that are jumping out at me is like they're more of listeners, whereas mentor is more of an interactive person. They will like kind of help you along the way and guide you, whereas a lot of these are more of they'll just kind of sit back and listen to your problems.
Good, that works nicely. Let's see if we can hear from a couple of other people. What's jumping out?
Hi, my name is Brianna. One that jumped out to me was guide. Yes, you know, a mentor is a guide, but at the end of the day, you take your own path. They are just there to tell you this would be a good path for you to take. But if you take a different path because you think it's good for you, that's okay too.
Yeah, good, that does work nicely. If we think about a literal guide, like you want to go someplace and a person is showing you where to go, then the mentor analogy doesn't really hold up because it's not like there's a specific way or path that somebody is going to put you on. It really is much more up to the person, which is a lot of what we're going to focus on today. One or two more?
So I'm Casey, I'm president of Eagle, and one thing I thought was interesting was consultant, where it kind of is like they're more of a guide and helping you make decisions, but at the end of the day, you're making your own decision. You're just asking them for their advice. So that's something I saw.
Good, that does work nicely. Consultant strikes me as a little bit, I don't know, cold or something like that, sort of like somebody who flies in when you pay them or need them as opposed to anything else. Anybody else?
My name is Danielle, and the one that struck out to me was therapist, because I feel like therapist is something, it's definitely like more official and like sit down and like someone you pay like for services, whereas like a mentor is just, that's like more relaxed and like that you're like more comfortable with them, and it's like a different relationship to me.
Yeah, I agree. That one strikes me as the most wrong and not even that much of a synonym. That yeah, the therapist relationship would be a very different relationship from a mentoring relationship. So much so that if a student started treating a mentor like a therapist, the mentor should probably say, "This sounds like you need to talk to somebody different about this. That's not within my expertise or professional capacity." Good, that works really nicely. I wanted to also emphasize though, and this is totally in keeping with what a bunch of you said already, that mentor is also a verb, and it doesn't necessarily always get presented like that. But why is it very important, including based on what people said, to emphasize that mentor is a verb as well as a noun? What does it do when we think of it as a verb, to mentor? I'll give you a minute. It's a part of speech question. It's not everybody's favorite kind of thing. It strikes me as though if we think of mentor as a noun, that is a person, place, a thing, or thing, as opposed to a verb that is an action statement, we can really conceive of the word as being very different. Were you going to say something? Go ahead.
Probably to teach would be a closer definition than advise, I feel like. Because if I look past it towards my life, my mentor is kind of more teach me than advise of my own actions.
Good, good. There's more? Tell me more about this. In some ways it comes down to the difference between a noun and a verb, which is probably not something you thought you were going to talk about today, but I said I teach English, so this stuff jumps out at me. Oh, thank you.
Well, when I think of like a mentor and mentorship, it's more of somebody wanting to do it, and it definitely is a two-way street. Like you have to, as a mentee, you have to like interact with your mentor for them to know So I guess for the verb, it's the interaction.
Good, good. I want to emphasize, and sometimes I interrupt people when I'm excited,
Yeah,
so I interrupted you, but it's supposed to be a positive interruption because I
Yeah.
was saying, good, good, good. Yeah. I'm not from the Midwest, so I'm from Brooklyn, New York originally, and when I was growing up, having a conversation meant interrupting each other. That's like we just interrupt each other through the whole thing. But it's a good interruption. Yes, I want to emphasize two words: the word that you ended with, which is interact, and a word that went by quickly, which is do. And those are words that we associate with verbs, rather than a person or a thing, which might not have any action built into it. In order to make mentoring relationships work, there really needs to be a doing, an interaction, and an action. Questions, thoughts, comments before we move on? I thought before we get into more of the specifics of what you can do in terms of cultivating mentorships, we'd run through some, there we go, some famous mentors from popular culture. And this is also potentially an opportunity to pick up on something that you said before about mentoring and or versus teaching, which is something that we'll need to get back to also. I don't know that people are going to be familiar with all of the pop culture mentors that we're going to run through. So if some of you are familiar with some of them, this is the place where you can jump in. Are people familiar with Dumbledore from Harry Potter? Good. Got a couple of people, enough people able to make this work. So you're going to be the experts on this. And then as we go through, maybe different people will be experts on some of the other ones. So as a mentor, how does Dumbledore stack up? If you want, you can think like something like pros and cons. What does he do that makes him a good mentor, and what is anything that you can think of that makes him a potentially questionable mentor?
He keeps to himself the most important information, I guess I would say. He doesn't feel like people are ready to handle it, but in actuality, it's something they may need to hear.
So that sounds like a negative. Yeah, if people are familiar with the stories, Dumbledore is regularly withholding what could be very important information from other characters. Maybe it's because if he said it too soon, it would ruin the story for the reader, but I don't know if we have to necessarily give him that slack.
Okay, I think a quality that's a good and bad quality about him is that he lets Harry go through the trials to grow, but also it is very life-threatening.
Yeah, good. That works really nicely. Yes, he definitely lets Harry do things on his own, which is, of course, very important for his development, except occasionally some of those things are life-threatening, which you're not really supposed to, sort of let your mentee do. Yeah, so that's a plus and a minus. Other things. Then we can move on. It's okay. If anybody wants to give me the move on signal, you can do that. We got a lot of stuff to cover. So I tried to put together some pros and cons also. In terms of his subject matter expertise, that is one of the things that people like to find a mentor for. That is somebody within your field that you think is very knowledgeable. Dumbledore definitely seems to have that. He's very attentive to his mentees' concerns. He has deep conversations. He has a great sense of humor. But as a couple of people already suggested, he does tend to be secretive and has his own agenda, and I totally agree that as a warning, he is known for endangering his mentees' lives. If anybody remembers back in the first book or first movie, one of the very early punishments was to send Harry, Ron, and Hermione into the Forbidden Forest, which is sort of like, that was, so the thing is, students do not go into the Forbidden Forest on pain of death. Oh, your punishment is go into the Forbidden Forest. It's a little complicated. Similarly, Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, this goes back a little bit further if people are familiar with the books or the movies. Tell me about Gandalf as a mentor.
Like a good thing is that at a certain point when he thinks they're good, he lets go.
Yeah,
Even
good.
though they still struggle, they make it eventually.
Good, and that you could decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but yes, he definitely is willing to let his mentees stake out on their own at some point, which they do struggle with, but maybe that makes sense. Good, a couple of other comments.
And then building up what she said, even though he lets them go, he will come in the most dangerous of times and save them, and then be like, all right, from here on out, you should be good. So he is a little hands-on, but he's not totally controlling.
Good, that works really nicely, and that sounds like good mentorship talk. Is that a hand up or you're just moving? You're allowed to move. This looks like hands up. Other comments. Good, we can continue. So again, similarly, he is highly motivating. If anybody knows the Hobbit, which I guess were less successful movies, but if you've read the book, he is very highly motivating, as in he tells Bilbo, you have to go on this thing, and then he does. He takes personal risks. He calls people out on their BS, which happens pretty regularly, where he yells at his mentees because they're not doing things that they're supposed to do. Or let's say they accidentally make a very loud noise that alerts all the monsters to their whereabouts. But on the other hand, he doesn't care if he hurts people's feelings. He does smoke a lot of pipe weed, which they never say exactly what that is, but you know, you can decide whether you want to be suspicious. And then you can decide whether if this is a version of letting mentees out on their own, or does he disappear in the middle of time-sensitive projects? Either way. Continuing, Yoda? People familiar with Yoda? Tell me about Yoda as a mentor.
Calm and patient.
Calm and patient. Tell me more. Do you want to go ahead? You want to continue?
I was gonna say he takes the time to teach his students, whereas like most people might rush it, and he's always making sure to like prep them for the situation and make sure that they're ready for it, rather than just sending them in half-baked.
Yeah, good. Almost the opposite of Dumbledore and Gandalf, where Luke is the one who leaves him, and Yoda says you haven't completed your accreditation. Yeah, he doesn't use that word.
So obviously he lacks physical prowess, and so he's a tempered mind. He's like, what, 800 years old, and he's a Jedi Master. And he perfectly embodies the Jedi tenets, which are like being calm and thinking about actions in the future, not acting on like rashness. And so, but Luke is obviously a young mentee, and he has a burning, unkept flame, and so being a tempered, wise, master, he can turn the flame down on Luke, you know.
Yeah, good. That works very nicely. Yeah. He does have what we associate with as a kind of mentoring temperament. That works really well. Yeah. Good. Anybody else?
Much like he said, he's very wise, and like, you know, he's like 800 years old. He knows like what to do and how to like put that message forward.
Good. Other comments? Go ahead.
He was also secretive, and he also uses confusing language.
Yes, that is a thing that you're noticing as a pattern in these pop culture mentors, is that they do tend to be secretive and withhold information. You can decide again whether that makes them a better mentor, a worse mentor, or whether this is just necessary for the stories to function in the way that they do.
He doesn't leave Luke in the dust. Even in the most recent version, or not version, but movie that the Jedi saw, he even returns to be like, you got this, like, don't do this. You need to be the hero.
Right. He does come back to continue mentoring even after he's killed, and so does Gandalf. That's a lot of commitment. I mean, I don't know if you're going to get any faculty members who are able to come back and continue mentoring you after their death. That tends to end the mentoring relationship.
So I think that him wanting to work slowly and like take the time is really good, but I think it might be kind of a flaw that he's not working at the pace that like Luke wanted to work at, which is why he left. He was like, you're not keeping, I want to move faster, you're not doing it, so I'm just going to leave early. So I think it's important that as a mentor you have to like stay with the mentee's pace also, otherwise they're going to get bored and give up or leave.
That is a great point. In other words, Luke has an entirely different timeline, you know, fate of the universe kind of stuff, where Yoda's been hanging back for a couple of 100 years or so, so it's, I don't know what the timeline on that is, a couple of decades, let's say, so his sense of time is very different.
Probably my favorite thing about Yoda as a mentor is he lets his mentees do the work instead of coming in and doing it for them and saying, hey, this is how you should do it.
Yeah.
He wants to show them, and then his words give it up for interpretation instead of them like, you have to do it this way, whereas Yoda is telling them, you just have to feel it out and then you will know what to do.
Yeah, that is a great point, and that speaks back to what you said about how he's not always clear. Lack of clarity is an interesting problem because sometimes there's deliberate or cultivated ambiguity because people want their mentees to figure things out, and sometimes there's just bad ambiguity, like somebody's not being clear enough and you need them to be.
I don't know. So this is something that I noticed with Yoda. I think, like people were saying, like he likes to step back a little bit and let the mentee do a little bit of the work. But I think that at some point in time, he also steps back a little bit too far, up to the point where they everything catches on fire, literally in the last movie. So, you know, I think a little bit more involved.
It's true, when you look at some of his results, I'm not sure how terrific they are. Yeah, so he does provide a hands-on training environment. I mean, some people really are experiential learners, and that's what he provides. He does challenge his mentees to do their best. He provides cool aphorisms. He does have unclear learning objectives, which, you know, you can decide as this cultivated ambiguity. He does use guilt and trickery on a regular basis, and he also eats Luke's food, which is just, I think that's overstepping a line, personally. There we go. Are people familiar with Mr. Miyagi from The Karate Kid? Tell me about him as a mentor. Did you have a hand up? Go ahead.
It's been a while since I watched a movie, but I think he's like really quiet, so he doesn't always talk, right? Is that it? I don't know. I think he doesn't really talk, so sometimes he like he doesn't talk, so then Karate Kid's like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this?
Yeah, good.
He doesn't like explain things.
He doesn't explain. Good. And again, in the movie, that turns out to be a good thing, but in the process, it doesn't feel like a good thing. Good. Other things.
Unconventional training methods.
Yeah, that works really nice. That's a very nice way of putting it. I like the way you put it. Yes, he uses unconventional training methods. If people have seen the movie, what does he essentially have Daniel do? Yeah. He has him doing what looked like non-karate related projects for a long time until finally, after a significant montage, we discover, oh, that's actually been helping him learn the moves through practice. But he doesn't present it that way. He doesn't present it as practice. Deliberately, at any point he could have explained what he was doing and he chose not to, which we're supposed to understand as part of his good mentoring, but doesn't always feel that way. Good, other comments? Yes, I think this wraps up a lot of what you're saying is a lot of focus and conviction. Again, experiential learning helps the mentees make his own connections. Notice the way in which he could have explained things much sooner. But yes, he has very unclear outcomes, doesn't answer questions, and watch out for wax on, wax off. Which, if you watch the movie, that is the one thing that you will probably remember forever. It is repeated very frequently. Rafiki from Lion King?
The goat.
Psychotic.
Psychotic, the others.
Again, he's also a little unclear with what he's meaning.
Yeah, unclear.
But in the end, it works out because, like, the main example is when he smacked Simba on the head, and he didn't understand why. So then he did it again, and then he dodged it, and then he realized, oh, he did teach me something.
Good. You're noticing, it sounds like a bunch of patterns in these pop culture mentors, which is that they do tend to be deliberately vague about things in ways that push the story forward, but as you're also noticing, it doesn't just push the story, it pushes the mentee. And so that is sometimes potentially frustrating for these characters or students, which is that in many ways, what you're noticing is that the characters are trying to emphasize their mentee's personal responsibility in ways that sometimes are frustrating. Other comments about Rafiki?
I think it's important that he's there the whole way. Like, I mean, not every mentor is going to be there from the time you're born, but he's there for like the whole journey. Even if he's not right by his side, like, eventually he comes at every point.
That's good. So Rafiki is more like a mentor who's assigned to somebody as opposed to somebody that they have to find or cultivate the relationship on their own. And that does feel different.
He promotes self-respect and self-confidence.
Yeah.
He constantly tells someone to believe in himself and remember who he is.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm assuming people are familiar with the movie. Are you going to see this digital-looking remake thing that's coming out? I just saw the preview for that the other day, and I'm not feeling this. I don't know. Are you feeling it? You're gonna see it. You going? Okay. I don't know. I sort of feel like what it made me want to do was rewatch the cartoon again. So maybe I'll do that, but we'll see. Yeah, one of the things that really jumps out in terms of what you're saying about Rafiki is that we just had recently in the movie had the whole Hakuna Matata song, which it turns out Rafiki doesn't really believe in. It turns out Hakuna Matata is wrong. Wow, we were enjoying that song so much, and the movie makes us have to rethink that whole thing. Continuing, yeah, so he's wise, he's persistent, he checks on mentees who disappear for long periods of time, which is pretty good. Most mentors won't check on you if you disappear for, how many years was Simba gone? It's hard to say.
Probably like 18, 20.
Yeah. I mean, certainly in terms of human years, he'd be gone for like 18 years. I don't know how fast lions develop. Maybe it was just a couple of years. No, then again, all of the pride lands were like ecologically ravaged. Would that happen in only a couple of years? No, probably not. Yeah, and he does use riddles and metaphors, he does use guilt trips, and he does hit his mentee, as you pointed out, which again, that works in the movie, but if your mentor hits you, you should probably report them to authorities. Also from Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Again, he's kind of like Rafiki, where he watches over Luke for a long period of time until he thinks he is ready to start developing his skills.
Yeah, good. In other words, again, there needs to be this activity on the part of the mentee. Is it just moving again?
No.
You're allowed. Okay, great. I was going to say you're allowed to move. I'm just calling it. Go ahead.
I think when he was training Anakin, or Anakin, when he was working with Anakin, I think he wasn't helping Anakin manage his darkest impulses.
Yeah, good. I don't want to get back to that. That's one of the points is that as we get to those later, I'm going to call them later, not earlier movies. Is that okay?
Yes.
They came out chronologically later.
Mm-hmm.
The order that you should see those movies is just see the first 3 that came out chronologically first, and then skip the prequels. Did you already watch the prequels?
Ouch.
If you didn't watch them, just skip them. You can live without them.
You can skip the Phantom Menace, but like.
No, skip all of them. Just skip them.
Ouch.
So we discover, right, that younger Obi-Wan was a mentor to the character who would become Darth Vader, and arguably this is a huge mentoring fail. Like if your mentee goes on to become the worst villain in the galaxy, you probably are going to look back on that and wonder if you should have mentored him differently.
Yeah, it was kind of where he wasn't really listening to Anakin. He was more of telling him to just shut up and do it the right way.
Yes, he does.
Instead of understanding what he's going through.
Yes, he does. He repeatedly tells him that he needs to do what he's told and follow rules, which is arguably very different from some of the other mentors that we've seen where they are required to follow their own path. And so, yeah, so we get this, he does trust his mentees, sometimes a little too much. He believes in different learning modalities. That's just a dumb teacher way of talking about that. He makes them do different stuff. He's willing to sever someone's hand as needed. If you remember at the beginning of the first Star Wars movie when somebody shoves Luke and he chops his hand off. I mean, that's some commitment. But yeah, he does, once again, withhold crucial information, and his most famous mentee joined the dark side, which again, if you're looking for recommendations, that's probably not one of them. Nick Fury from the Avengers movies.
Way too intimidating.
Yeah, you probably aren't gonna, this was that issue before about do you want to see your mentor as a therapist? Nobody is gonna see him as a therapist.
He withhold vital information numerous times.
Yeah, he does this a lot.
In Captain America Winter Soldier, he was dead and didn't tell anybody he was actually alive.
Yeah,
He was killed, and then you think Cap and Black Widow would be understanding that they should know that, but they weren't told.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so more withholding of information. Again, in terms of what you can take from this, perhaps that's a learning experience for mentees, or perhaps it's important to share better.
Like he saw like the strengths in all of these like superpowered people and like was able to put them all together.
Yeah, good. That works really nicely. And so yes, he definitely has excellent team and project management skills. He also doesn't care what anybody thinks, which is in some ways a strength, but it also he doesn't care what you think either. He bends rules regularly as it suits him, and watch out for possible profanity. Although not in the Avengers movies. He Mary Poppins? Are people still familiar with Mary Poppins? I know it had the follow-ups. It wasn't quite a remake, but a follow-up from a couple of years ago. It wasn't as popular. If you haven't seen Mary Poppins, you should definitely see it. The songs are lovely.
I agree. Magical.
Yeah.
She also kind of lets the children come about their own way instead of just telling them this is what you need to do. She's kind of like, all right, I want you to learn, so we're going to take you through some experiences that make you learn.
Good. And yet, if you're familiar with the movie, somebody could have a different perception of that, although I agree. In some ways, she seems to be very rule-oriented and prescriptive, but it's towards getting the children to follow their own path. So it's really interesting the way in which she provides both freedom and structure. Is anybody else familiar with the movie?
So I think that it's important to think about the fact that she is working with children,
Yeah.
so she's finding ways that will interest them and get them to do what she wants, because you have to work very differently when you're working with children to get them to understand things and then to want to do it. So
Yes,
she
good.
makes things more mystical, more fun, and so I think she's just playing into what she can with them.
Good. But I think that's a great way of putting it. She gets the children, who I'm referring to as her mentees, to want to do things, which is very powerful. Even though they're things that before she showed up, they were the same things that they didn't want to do. Good. Oh, was that here? Okay. So again, she has clear expectations, unlike, let's say, other mentors. She's very good about time management. I believe they sing a whole song about that. We should have more songs about time management. I think it would really help people out. She is kind but firm, but sometimes she wants things done her way. She actually says that. She does not stay in touch after graduation. That is, once she's done with the children, she just floats away and then you never see her again. And she never explains herself, which she says in the movie, word for word, I never explain myself. And if you have a mentor who says that, sometimes that makes people distinctly uncomfortable. And then we get to Hunger Games. I know that's the theme of this thing. Are people familiar with the books and the movie? Can we even talk about this? I didn't know that if this was a thing that still stuck with students. I didn't know if it ran its course a little bit. In some ways with Haymitch, we've been focusing on pros and cons. I think the obvious place to begin is with the cons. What makes him not such a good mentor, at least when we are first introduced to him?
Heavy drinker.
Yeah, he is a heavy drinker.
He doesn't seem to care.
Does not seem to care. I think he's got more things not in his favor.
Very self-serving. Like,
Yes.
He's looking out for himself.
Good, he's looking out for himself.
He's more excited about the perks that come with being a mentor than actually helping the mentees.
Yeah, good, that works really nicely. Luckily in real life there are very few external perks that come with being a mentor, so that takes care of that. But yes, other things?
He doesn't really have any motivation to help them.
Yes, good, he does. He is very unmotivated, which I think takes into account a lot of the things that other people said. We could probably put them all into the unmotivated basket. Yeah, no, he ostensibly at the very beginning looks like a terrible mentor, which is part of the point. For those of you who follow this through, what do we discover about him?
He pushes to get them all the resources they need.
Yes, good. So it turns out that he is capable of pushing for resources in a way that we don't realize at the beginning. Other things?
He was able to manipulate the thinking of the games to be able to let PETA and Katniss win.
Yeah, good. In other words, he does have arguably this real knowledge and insider knowledge of how the Hunger Games work because he's literally done it before too, which is really in some ways really great as a mentor. That is, if you can find mentors who are actually doing or have done the things that you hope to do, they really have some valuable experience that they can pass on to you.
He taught Katniss and PETA how to play their audience in an attempt to get as much as they can.
Yeah, good. He not only knows how the game works, he understands the larger, something like metagame aspects of it, the way in which it's not just the game itself, but the larger way in which they interact with the audience. He really understands all these things very well in a way that we don't see near the very beginning. I wanted to get back to your point about how he doesn't seem motivated. What do we later understand was really going on in terms of what looked like his lack of motivation? What do we know about him as a mentor? What? Well, that comes a little bit later, so somewhere before that and after we discover it's not that he lacks motivation, which I'll share with you in a minute. Maybe I'm thinking of a very particular thing. That we understand in many ways this is a version of, and if you go on a job interview and you're asked your weakness, one of the cliches is to say, you just care too much. But I think that's true about Haymitch. Turns out it wasn't that he wasn't motivated, it was that he cared too much. What's the problem with caring too much in the Hunger Games? Yeah, people start dying and you get attached to them and then they're dead. And so he just doesn't even want to get attached to anybody. It's not that he's not motivated, it's that the loss is too great. It turns out that he's got this rich emotional tapestry that we're not exposed to earlier on.
Also that he's the only victor, so he's been like the mentor for all the past contenders.
Yes, he's been the mentor for many dead contenders already. Yeah, he's seen them all die. It has a negative effect. It seems to have driven him to drink. Yeah.
And then being the only winner, he lives apart from the rest of the village, so which makes him another lonely part of his life.
Yeah, good. I want to get back to that. And so, if we start with the, there we go. Yeah, if we start with the cons, it's arguably very negative, but if we get to the pros, he definitely cares more than we realize. He has all of this relevant life experience, and he does really help Katniss to win. As a way out of here, so what do we understand about mentoring, for better or for worse, from these and other pop culture mentors? Let's see if we can get a couple of concluding comments. How does pop culture perceive of or represent mentoring in ways that can help us to talk about mentoring, even if it's not necessarily in a positive way?
So something that I thought of that's not so positive, like so many of them, they withhold information. That's something that they did a lot. They're like, you don't need to know that yet. And maybe the person did need to know
Yeah, we're definitely going to change the outcomes of a lot of these things if people have been a little more forthcoming with information. Yeah.
A really easy blanket statement that you can paint is with Star Wars being a really easy example. There's a clear ethical duality in Star Wars. Obviously, there are Sith tenets and Jedi tenets, and the Sith ones are things that we can embody in the real world, such as like revenge and anger and hate. And so if we can take that hero arc that all these embody, because obviously there's a classic protagonist hero arc in all these, and we can put it into I'm the mentee and you're the mentor. You can take things like discipline and instill them to me as like instead of revenge and anger, because those are very sci-fi, take over the world kind of things, but with real world things like discipline and accountability and honesty. It's really easy to transfer those, and from a movie to a real life situation.
I want to pick up on one thing in particular that you said, which is this idea of the heroic arc. And as you'll notice, in terms of the hero's arc, these characters are not themselves the hero. They are some version of helping the hero along. And as a result, almost all of them need to disappear in some way or another at some point. And of course, this is really sad and upsetting. Like, is it still a spoiler to say that Gandalf and Dumbledore die? No, right? Like, we can talk about Dumbledore being dead. Oh no, did I upset you? You're like, I'm only on the second book. Okay. I feel like it's hard to tell what the statute of limitations on this is. So Game of Thrones, too soon. Avengers Endgame, too soon. Harry Potter, no, yeah, we have to be able to talk about this. So yes, in some ways, of course, it's devastating if you're watching or reading these things to see that many of these characters die or disappear. But on the other hand, that in terms of the storytelling is always part of the narrative arc, which is that the mentor has to die or disappear. Why is that? Why is that so familiar or common that there's this separation from the mentor at some point, usually about 2/3 of the way through the whole story?
Because it lets the mentee grow as a person and lets them start going down their own path without having that hand on their shoulder.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you can talk about arcs in characters, and so there's a flat character arc, there's a positive character arc. Like the Avatar: The Last Airbender is a really, really easy one to talk about. Zuko, but I don't know if I've let everyone familiar with that. But like for Anakin, he has a negative character arc, and so if the mentor disappears, you can allow that arc to come to fruition because you're letting the reins off the character. He's a guiding force. As soon as you take that guiding force off, they're now free to either believe the lie that the character believes, which was Anakin's tragic flaw, or cultivate into a hero.
He obviously feels very different about the prequels than I do. That's okay. We can differ about this. Other things that we can understand or learn in terms of pop culture mentorship of heroes that we can start thinking about or applying to oneself. I wanted to throw a couple of things out there for your consideration. One of them is you'll notice a preponderance of older males. It's worth mentioning that that's not necessarily the case in real life. If anything, I had to dig pretty deep to even get to Mary Poppins, which not everybody will even see as a mentor figure, maybe more as a teacher or even nanny figure, because that's what she technically is in the movie. It's actually pretty hard to find pop culture stories with female mentors in them, which will absolutely and should not be the case. You'll also notice a lot of white beards here, and again, that's something like a cultural shorthand or stereotype, but it does involve a certain amount of sexism to even continue to depict it that way. People do not need to have beards or white beards in order to be mentors. Mentors can look like anybody. I thought that was very important to point out that we're still somehow not over this version of the Gandalf, Dumbledore, Obi-Wan Kenobi vision of what a mentor is supposed to look like. Other comments? Okay, then let's move on. At this point, this takes us to the material that was in the PDF that Ebony Ramsey, I think, gave to everybody. That's a thing, right? She bundled a whole bunch of different documents into a PDF, and you have this. So if you want to pull that out, there should be about a page of questions related to this session. I flipped through it, and it looked like it was pretty early on in the version that I saw, so let's see if that's where it is. Oh, wait, there it is. I saw it. Are there page numbers? There are no page numbers. So it's the, sorry, I'm touching your stuff. It's the page, 2 pages after the second keynote speaker. So after put the odds in your favor, design digital credibility, the next page. find it yet? Okay, so at this point, you can move the desks around again. Let's get into groups of about 4 to 6 or so, and I'd like you to take your own notes as you go through this. Because ideally, if you can answer some or many or even most of these questions, you'll leave here today with a whole bunch of different ways that you yourself personally can approach or think about mentoring next. So I want everybody individually to take notes about this. But I also want you to talk about your notes with small groups. So if you want to reconfigure these tables a little bit so that this way you can be in a group of about 4 to 6, you can stick with the people you're with if that makes you happy, or you can move around. And then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lesson whiteboards in here. I'd like for each group on the whiteboard to write down just one important point that your group talked about that you want to share out with the other groups. So there are a whole bunch of different questions on here. I think it makes more sense to just give you a block of time, and then Luis and I will come around and ask you how things are going and ask you some more specific questions. And then as we recap, when are we supposed to be done with this thing? At 12:30, or you have to be at lunch at 12:30? Lunch starts at 12:30. So let's give you about 20 or 25 minutes to work through the questions in small groups, and then that'll give us about 10 or 15 minutes to go through some of the groups and some of the questions and have you share out on the whiteboards. Okay? So go ahead and move around, move some tables, get into different groups. You guys all? I'm going to take personal notes for yourself based on the questions, but then I also want you to have something that you're ready to share out with that you're going to talk about that you want everybody to hear. That can be short.
Be my spot, be my group. Are you bringing a table over? Yeah. I was waiting for him to throw up the eye right. Something as positive as you are.
And then at any point over the next 20 minutes, if you hit upon something that you'd like to share out with the whole group, you can write it on this board over here.
Yo, that's mine, sorry.
I was like,
something that you think, oh, this is something that we should share.
Yeah.
They just generate their one thing that you talk about that you think is valuable to share.
Oh, absolutely. Political view? I don't really have one. Okay. Some people I never have an argument with people because I don't have to do it. Unbothered? Yeah.
Is it necessary to have a meeting?
Instead of like giving you a lesson,
yeah, I would say no, but it would benefit you greatly.
It's like a catalyst. I'm not just thinking you need a catalyst. You can get up and flow. But the mentor can like the activation. Yeah, it's completely.
I guess it really depends on what you think of as a mentor. I think of mentors in different ways, like your life coach, but I also think of like your friends are sometimes your mentors.
So you can still have the same, like you can still get there, just like instead of going over the mountain, you go through the mountain. Like
you're gonna get there no matter what. Like your life coach. You don't really need a life coach in Maryville, but it sure does help.
Yeah, Brady is the
goat.
Yeah, I'll have Brady.
So this is a question.
Yeah, is it necessary to have a mentor? It depends on if it's like in film, like characters always have tried flaws, and so like. But if you're talking about like real people, I don't know.
It depends on the person.
You can't be a pro basketball player without a coach and a team. I know it's popular in movies too. I grew up on the streets with a coach and I became good, but like you have a coach, you know, when you so why not have a coach for other things like academics? Exactly.
It makes sense at the time.
Father figures are really important going on as a child instead of if you're fully formed like as 21-year-old adults. If you're 8 years old, I do believe it's necessary to have a male mentor in terms of either parent figures or guardian figures.
Hey, just go through all of these, but you can pick and choose which ones jump out. Like, you don't have to actually, not everybody answers every single one of them, but try to have something around for yourself for each category.
It's helpful. What is the difference between a teacher and a mentor?
In my opinion, a teacher is more just presenting the information to you, whereas a mentor will kind of like give you something to do with that information and give you activities to help you further your understanding.
I like that, yeah. Presenting is a good word. It's just like a block of information.
Yeah, a teacher is more of like, here's this information, you go do with what you want with it. A mentor is like, all right, I set this up for you, use this information and figure this out.
Yeah, I feel like, the teacher like shows you, but like a mentor kind of gives you a tool to do what you like. I'm gonna give you spaghetti sauce, like spaghetti noodles and sauce. You know, like, let's say you can solve about give a man a loaf of bread.
Oh, no, you can give a man a fish, or you can give him a fish and feed a man for
How and why do mentoring relationships differ?
Get away from the subject, like we were just saying.
Yeah. I think we've already discussed that portion.
In terms, I'm the moderator, so don't do my job for
You really tried it. Me and him always go at it.
In terms of mentorship,
What would you like to learn?
what would you like to learn? I feel with Ebony, this wasn't our like advisor.
It's like, what about having a good Tuesday?
It's just positivity. It's like even like through the worst of things, and I'm like, I can eat it. Yeah, pretty fast.
Gonna be damn, can I say that?
That's what I'm saying. Josh, you're a junior, but this year, next year, this upcoming year, I'll be a junior.
That's the eldest of the
I mean, like, I'm not always the most positive person. I'm real. I'm very like also tough on my emotions. Oh yeah.
You're not gonna sugarcoat it.
Everyone always knows I'm thinking. But yeah, that's like.
So you want that? So back on the mentorship, you want that positivity that everybody has.
Well, you can run through all the questions. You can just go through as many things as you want.
As a youth, I find myself arrogant and selfish, like just like many characters in film and movies when they first start out. Just like most people tend to be, you know, like when they're untempered. And so I had a strong father figure and I had strong coaches growing up, and they led me down a different path than if I didn't have them. How to work with a team, how to be positive, and so that's what I want to learn. I want to learn how to have the wisdom of somebody who's much older than me and knows what their flaws were and stop me from repeating them.
This goes back a little ways. One of the lessons in that movie is that part of the way that people acquire wisdom is simply through repetition, which is not usually the way you think of wisdom usually.
Yes!
Things that they have to have some experiences like that we see. Like Mountain House, like I was a character just repeats the same day over and over again for what must be, say, years and years. At the end of this years and years repeating the same day, he knows everything that's happening to everybody in the area. He saves someone from the car, he does a capital retreat, he does the piano, he does all the answers that he's generating. And he's making ice sculptures, and it's very funny, but the idea is not real. His experience of things is more like a repetition. There's a long way of saying
How I think
the years themselves, any text
Go back. So for mine, what I want to get for this year, this is my first year on the executive board.
I didn't even know that.
He also has a good life to him. He's always trying to stay positive, and his willingness to just get I feel like sometimes I just shut myself off, and I'm like, okay, I need to do this. Like, it's only me that these things. I want to do it right. I gotta do it. But he's just more of a group thinker. And I wish I could want to be more like him.
Back off.
You're like hype man in the group. You're like, don't keep around time.
I don't know, for me, I guess it's a learning experience, but at the same time, I guess I have different mentors, and like, it's one of more like a formal one, where it's like more of teaching, or somebody who's in the same shoes that I've been in, more like a friend, so.
How often would you like to where?
Yeah, I need a big one for
How often? Probably just every so often, but more often than times like if I'm getting scholars and coming up and I can't get it to go right in the coming days, then I'll probably like more during those times.
You guys are judging me so. I mean, like,
I don't know, I always have this thing where both when you're internally, but when you're, I guess, at your greatest point. And so I try to come just like, even when I feel like it's not really needed to go, just because in the end you'll feel like you got something out of it. And just talking about like what you did or what you can continue to do.
Just by doing that, let your mentor know that they are doing a good job.
Every time we have to fight. It's like, what is your life?
Only when there's a disaster or an emergency, it does that they're there for us to put out fires.
And now pressing pathways. You know, watch out.
I don't know
it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. That's a default as opposed to.
Or Danny already knows that. You know that I won't go anywhere
What are your goals for next year?
You're looking at my co-bouncer.
Yeah, we're here to set our budget goals.
I'm gonna read.
Yeah, they
What do you feel is an effective way to approach a mentor?
I just pretty much scare the guys a little bit.
What's the problem?
That was really helpful.
Yeah, how about a start relationship? You're a good moderator.
Small risk. It's like hard.
Ebony sent it to me, but I was kind of expected to go anyway, so I didn't see the point as far as
I say percent of visions. So I work in the emergency room as scribe. I'm a pre-med, and so.
Okay. could be a surprise. I don't know.
Yeah, I do too. And I needed to shadow somebody because I work with a lot of ER docs, but it doesn't have shadowing hours. So I went to like one of the internists came down to like take a patient upstairs, and I was like, "Hey, Dr. Lesky," and I presented this vision. I'm like, "Man, I want to be in internal medicine one day. Can I shadow you? Can I just like follow you around?" And he was like, "Of course." But so I just presented my vision, my passion to him, and he just like sees a younger him, and so he was
Yeah, maybe he's paired with you and he didn't want you. I don't know. Like, sometimes you are paired with someone, you know, like that happened last year with the energy. People didn't like the advisor, but it plays a lot. And like, they come to like, you might not like the person, you might not like them throughout the like whole experience, but you can always take something from them. Other than like the people I know for sure. My first like required in high school, I didn't like my partner, like as a person, but like I've learned some lessons throughout that I really take with him. He as a mentor with me, he got me out of a lot of trouble. So yeah.
My experience this past summer,
It was fun.
I would 2 days a week. I got to see him do a few surgeries. We got to go out to farms and work on cows, work on horses. And just throughout the whole experience, he was very adamant to make it known that I was understanding what he was doing at the time. And that was just one of the best things about it. Is that I could tell he cared about me instead of just, I don't like taking away like shadowing. He didn't just let me just like follow me around. Like he would stop me when he was doing. He'd be like, okay, this is what I'm doing. This is the medicine that I'm using. So that's the one thing I really loved about it. He really showed me care.
I don't know. My approaches were all different. Like, I guess with Alicia, I was assigned to her, and then for outside, I initially was and that became a friend, and then my friend became a mentor. So I think that was just like having the same experiences and him seeing what I wanted to become. And then I have Diego. I haven't talked to him this year, but like, I don't know, he's so wise, and like, and he's like, now let's go have coffee and like, let's just talk about life.
People said about buying a camera, I'm just like, I'm so excited. Those exams, I've heard those exams.
I mean, like a lot of this is like what they
I'm taking one this May. It's PE. Okay.
How can you request a meeting?
We just finished setting goals, and we're gonna launch projects.
That's what I'm saying, like, I don't know, but like some people, that's a weird question.
Email, text?
Word as, hey, we need to word it more as a, hey, would there be available time that you can meet with me? I'm having some difficulties, or I want to talk to you about how good life's going right now, or something like that. Try not to be as like demanding.
You just remember, like, you can just be like, hey, do you have a second to talk? Or it doesn't have to be like all formal and stuff like that.
Oh, you know my schedule. I have to plan everything out.
No, but like, Mallory, there are times, I have a very hectic schedule as well, but like there's times I say, hey, Mallory, how are you doing today?
Yeah, and that's hi, bye. Yes.
I'm the same way though.
We are, and we just bump heads, but it's okay.
I'm not a good person.
Me either. It's just me. Calling it all. You guys want me to write something?
I just got an application of my handwriting.
It's a hard time.
Those letters.
I think that I don't remember. It might be your singing that's throwing me off.
Okay. I don't understand why we don't have advisory council.
Oh yeah, it's tomorrow.
I know, like we're here.
I can evaluate. I can
You're
evaluate.
fine. You're fine. I have hips, and you know. Is it? What do you guys want me to answer? What are we talking about?
Writing on the
There's one key thing I'm sorry.
Oh, helpful or not helpful?
No, I would say the one about how you can just always go to them no matter like if you're sad,
Oh yeah,
bad.
A lefty.
I am a lefty.
It can be short, like a little bit, just as a way to get out of here.
So whiteboards are not your favorite.
No.
Be the Utah reference. I'm a speaker of the house. Yeah, I am a good moderator. She is the Secretary of Treasury, or the more specifically, she's financial officer. The CFO. She's pissing a lot of people off. No funding for you. That's not funny. I'd be pissed. Budget cuts. That's what my platform is going to be. My judicial system that nobody wants to get on with. Because no one wants to be checked.
I don't think MSG would be able to do anything.
You said what?
I said my judicial system that nobody wants to be for because no one wants to be checked.
I like the judicial.
No, like everybody's like, you just check me, and I'm like, let's do it. I don't know. You don't need to check me. But yeah, you should.
Why not?
I'm
sold.
I like the idea just so I don't have to talk to people all the time.
Okay, that's wonderful. Because I really do need a blue time rep. I need a powder rep. We're gonna get that together as a group in about 3 or 4 minutes. Basically, what a rep does is, like if they have issues with their like red light, they will come to us, and then or if somebody, if I lived in Bhutan and I wasn't in MSG at all, I would be like, Bhutan always gets like the brunt of like everything's better in Potter, everything's better in Sing. They have Come For Your Love cushion toilet talk. Then they would bring up to me and I would say, hey Josh, can you go talk to Jen about the love cushion in the Bhutan? They're raggedy or they have holes in them. And then Josh would bring that up to Jen about Bhutan. It's like the liaison between MSG and the rest of
I lived in Saints first year, but my best friend was Bhutan, so I went over.
I agree, they are.
Oh, yeah. That was the only. It's new shower curtains, that's it.
I mean, if it helps, I don't have any complaints about it.
So,
well, there are some complaints about Potter, but I've heard that. That means there's probably hair in there somewhere. Or sludge. Yeah.
I haven't had that problem.
It depends. Like I remember some person being about like stink bugs were one of the problems.
Stink bugs is a problem, but I didn't have that this year.
Yeah,
But I know people on my floor that did have it.
And then like when people, some of their curtains were like their actual like, closed curtains. There were problems with that. Stuff that I can't discuss about, but. Yeah. You would never expect them to mine did that last year. I know, that's the luxury with Potter. They go in and like replace the whole, like they replace the whole thing. With Bhutan, they're like, you got a good 2 years, let's put another bowl in there.
And we thought they just tell you this, you know, it's like
No.
I mean, I wouldn't mind a golf cart shuttle from Spotter to Gander.
Yes, I've been talking about that. Like, they should have like buses or shuttles, but like, why can't they have like?
I heard that's a lifetime curse.
That is a lifetime.
That's something I'm gonna do.
In the winter though.
In the winter, it is
In the winter, it is terrible. I do cut through.
It's like dash. That's just the 100-meter dash right across campus.
I mean, I don't mind it in the summer because it's cool, but in the winter, I hate having to used to like wear pink coats, like bundle up just to go get food.
Shuttles and like different boards get to like run the shuttle for like for a week or a day or something.
I mean, I know they do that for like 9 days.
Yeah, but something to keep it out, but like different orgs to switch out
Like,
and do it.
maybe like do something like a week a month, or like a day or a month. Just do something each month. We're going to do like a shuttle day. Oh yeah.
Like release it. And we're going to use the rest of the time for sharing the discussion, so I'm going to go over like, to Louise so like a strap up like for like.
Hey, we're ready to bring this back together. You ready?
Well, we can do this in 5 years, hopefully.
Like, are we? Nah, you can stay with it. As long as you can see each other, you don't have to move the tables again. Let's hear about some of your responses. Go ahead.
Who wants to go first? I can explain what you guys wrote.
Oh, we can go first. So basically, our like main one was you can go to your mentor no matter like if you're having a good day, if you're having a bad day, like they want to check in on you and see that like their work is paying off, like what they're putting into you is actually like showing a result, like your life isn't just a hot mess. Like there's some good things in it too.
Some of what we talked about. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead. Continue on to it.
Oh, you can go on Mallory because that was the first one was mine.
Okay, so I put down that like mentor relationships aren't just like someone who's like super old and you. So I have like your assigned advisor, a life coach, an older student, or just a friend. And then you approach your mentor by asking if they have time to talk, because in the end, like it is like 50-50, and just because like you need something, they just can't just like come like that. Like, yeah, drop everything for you. So
you want kind of like a formal relationship, but also more personal at the same time.
yeah.
I can do the last one. And then for the approaching your mentor, it doesn't always have to be like in the form of a formal email. Like you don't always have to, try to be as formal and as like not too respectful is not what I'm trying to say, but like you don't always have to like put them on a pedestal is what I'm trying to say. Just like ask them if they have time to talk as a friend and can sit down and have a cup of coffee and just like decide like what's going on in life.
You can take this. You could. Alright. So something I was thinking of, what's better, a forced mentorship or an actual one? Because I know some of you are in the Multicultural Scholars Program, and it has a mentor-mentee like sort of foundation set to it. But that's forced upon you to go through that. And for some, I know it's been a really good experience for that. Like they get to grow and be with another person. But also, do you prefer like going on your own and finding your own person, or do you want someone to give you an assigned mentor?
Like it works out if the person wants to be a mentor and like wants to be there for you all the time, but like if they don't if it seems like they don't have time for you, you don't really get as much out of it. Like I've been forgotten before.
Yeah.
Oh.
She's nice though.
Well, like for me,
like, even if I'm assigned a mentor, like I have been assigned a mentor, and sometimes it just doesn't click. And so with that, like, I guess it grew where they're just more a friend. But then with that, I guess I found a mentor within my assigned mentor. So I think it worked out.
Just kind of like 50-50 chance that it
Yeah.
will work and it will not work.
Yeah.
When you're forced, I think you don't have to choose your dad, you don't have to choose your mom.
Yeah.
So parental roles are important. Role models when you're impressionable and you're young, and you have zero wisdom, as opposed to when you're 21 and you're an established adult to some degree, and you're forced to have a life coach. That can have there can be strain in that relationship. When you have a father figure, you know, kind of hope that they're good. Same thing with coaches. Like if you're playing little league t-ball versus college basketball, you still don't choose your coach. So you have to make it work if you want the best out of the relationship as well.
So you also have to put the effort to making that mentorship work. And then something I really noticed, like, so a pet peeve of mine is when communicating with your mentor, especially for like emails, don't treat your email like a text message. There's a huge difference between a text and an email. If you're sending an email out, like make sure to include like a subject line, CC anyone if you need to CC anyone, and have it more like structured and organized. Because just like the small little details will show your mentor that you're putting the effort to actually, you know, work hard and they tell you like, you know, email etiquette. These little details will really help you so you're growing being like a professional person. And of course you are more like a text kind of person with them, and that's okay to like be more casual about it. If you're going with an email, like always make sure to be formal, not treat it as a text message.
Want to move on to the next group? Go ahead.
Okay. So we talked. We talked about a little bit more into like what the difference is between a teacher and a mentor. So for the teacher, difference is that they kind of just give you the lesson. They kind of tell you what is right, what is wrong, or like in a particular like a classroom setting, it's going to be like a central idea that they have, and this is like the right answer. But with a mentor, it's walking through the steps to come to your own conclusion based on like a specific lesson that they might want you to have, or something that you're going through in your life. It's less their opinion and more your opinion. So let's say for instance, you have like, you know, you're going through like a challenging time with like somebody in your family, and you have a mentor that you talk to about a particular issue. Rather than telling you like what's wrong or what's right, you're going to ask for like their advice on like how to approach the situation so that you can come to your own conclusion for that. Yeah.
Other comments for anybody in the group?
Yeah. So I would say like a mentor can be a teacher, but a teacher is not a mentor. Just because a teacher is not focused on you, and they're more focused on like, you know, classroom setting, like giving everyone the same information, and that's it. A mentor will like go one-on-one with you and tell you like, all right, this is some information, and now how can we build on this information? So it's more like a personal connection, just as opposed to like a teacher who's more just like, here's material and then good luck.
Next group?
So we also talked about like teachers and mentors. So basically what we just said was like teachers help you develop skills, and mentors help you put those skills into action, and they're like in your field of study and stuff like that.
Other comments from anybody in the group? Go ahead.
We also said that like teachers, like the teacher-student interaction was more one-way versus like a mentor-mentee is like two-way. So that's a big difference between the two.
Yeah, good. I want to keep emphasizing that point that in some of the different groups, I overheard different people talking about some of these. You know, what are you looking for from your mentor? How often would you like to meet, or where? And in some ways, the answers to those are, you know, personal and will depend on any number of things. I think that was something this group said. You know, the answer is it depends. That's almost always the right answer. I mean, so the idea then is what does it depend on, and how can you determine that? But I wanted to emphasize how important it is that students or mentees are asking these questions too, as opposed to assuming that it's the mentor who's going to determine all of these things for you. The idea that the mentor will tell you where you meet, or how often you meet, or what the agenda or goals are going to be. And it won't work as well if that's the way that it's happening. It's crucial that the mentee is also making those decisions and deciding what your own goals are, and even deciding where to meet. I overheard in this group, I think you were talking about meeting in your mentor's office, which could be fine, but in some ways that's a kind of default space, and if you would rather find another space to meet, it's really not only is it okay for you to say that, it's great if you suggested, what if we meet in Starbucks? What if we meet off campus? Or something along those lines. Your mentor can decide if that will work or not work, but it's okay for you to make those kinds of offers, because again, it's suggesting in some ways a more equal relationship than in somebody else's office. The power dynamic is already established there, as opposed to a less, potentially powered space. Let's continue this group.
So we also talked about teacher mentor in here. And so I'm zapping away. Yeah, so like I'll be assuming like teacher like tells you like facts, like this happened, but like where a mentor like takes advice like and from their experiences, like how they did something and how like it's like similar to what you're doing now and like what you're going through, and like how they dealt with it and how like that could help you and could help you. So like that between like very factual versus like advice.
Casey, is it okay if I ask you to share what I overheard you talking about with the way that you talked to your group advisor? That you had a question for her?
Oh, okay, yeah. So our advisor, they're able, we're a disability advocacy group on campus, and I was just kind of curious because I never thought to ask this before, but like, why did our advisor put it into disability advocacy, and why? Like, does she have any personal experience with it, or does she have a family member, or something like, just out of curiosity's sake, just to know, like, okay, so I don't want to know more about it.
Yeah, I think
why
that's
she had it.
great. I mean, I want to emphasize the curiosity piece. It's possible that any number of other things might come out of that conversation that wouldn't have come out of it if you didn't initiate that question. Or maybe nothing will come out of it, but it was a conversation that you got to have and get to know each other better, and that's good in the same way. Okay, this group?
So we talked about it's important to be an active participant in your mentor-mentee relationship as the mentee, so you can't like leave them behind and it should be 50-50, or I mean, if anything, you should probably be putting in more work. It shouldn't be all on your mentor to put in all of the work, and then you just kind of like listen to them a little bit and go with it. And then we had another point that was separate, but we wanted to say like, we were thinking about some of the things that you shouldn't do and how your relationship shouldn't be, and so we thought of like life coaches. A lot of people think of like your life coach as a mentor, and so we had the thought of, don't call your life coach like in the middle of the night because you're like drunk and sad because you like failed a test, because that's not like, it's not respectful of them, and that won't help build your relationship. Like a better example, if you're sad about like how you did on a test, you can text your life coach and say, hey, can we meet, can we get coffee, can I talk to you about this? Because they can offer you encouragement, but not if it's like the middle of the night and you open them up and you're just a hot mess.
Yeah, again, that's that therapist-mentor distinction. I'm very glad you brought that up. That was one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we talked about, was whether anybody had discussed any particular behaviors to avoid. So I think that's a really good example. There was one that I wanted to share with you, but I'll wait for other responses. Anything that you probably, so we spent most of this time talking about things you can and should do. What about things that maybe you should avoid doing? We got one, don't send tearful, drunken texts in the middle of the night. Anything else?
I'd say like don't like push a relationship with someone, because like if they're not giving you the feedback back, then that's obviously like not worth it. Like there's other people.
That is a really great point too. It's not like this mentorship necessarily needs to last forever. If you discover or decide that it's not the right thing, it is okay to end it and begin something with somebody else. I mean, as people were talking about, things don't always necessarily work out.
Don't take advantage of the relationship. So like, if you notice that your mentor is really interested and been helping you a lot, don't start asking them to do everything for you.
Good, that goes back to this 50-50. Did you whisper 60-40 before? I thought that was funny. Yeah. So if you can't do 50-50, then sure, 60-40 is okay too.
The reason why I think it's 60-40 is because like they're like your mentor is gonna have a lot more resources than you're gonna have. And in relation to like utilizing your mentor, I think that it's actually a good thing to use your mentor because they have the resources for a reason, and you're going to have to get those resources in order to be successful. So like, let's say somebody like Ebony, like she's the dean for student life. Basically, I talked to her about getting an internship with like different like not marketing companies, but like different event planning companies or entertainment companies and whatnot. And she has like connections in those, and I was like, like let me know what you can do. Like, so like what can I do for you, and what can you do for me, type of thing, you know. So
no, good. I just wanted to get to that because I think there's something to that. Were you gonna say something before? That looked like you were gonna say something.
Always make sure that it is a two-sided relationship, that you're helping your mentor at almost the same level, either with support or like respect or assistance in any way.
Yeah,
that
good.
you can.
And I concluded my year with the student I was working with in the Multicultural Scholars Program, and we were talking about the year and different things, and he said something like, it would have been really nice if we went to a restaurant together. I thought, he could have told me that at any point in the last year. So we're still gonna do this. I mean, this will still happen, but for whatever reason, he had this idea later on and didn't feel like he could tell me, and I would have welcomed a suggestion like that. I think your mentors are very interested in what you think, what you want to do, what your goals are, and any number of other things. The one thing I did want to add about what to avoid was something that as I was talking through some of this presentation with other faculty members, multiple people said, please tell students that if they need a letter of recommendation, they have to give people lots of notice for it, that people will frequently ask for a letter a day or two before they need it, and it's very hard to write a good letter and get it to the right place that quickly. So if this is important, make sure you give people lots of notice. And then whatever the equivalent of that is in other things, that if you're asking somebody to do something, it really is a huge courtesy and better for you to give the person lots of notice. That is, you're going to get a better letter if you give a person a month's notice or 2 weeks notice than if they have to write it the day before. It can't possibly be the best letter that it's going to be. We are just about out of time. This actually went a little bit longer, I think, even than I thought it was going to, because everybody was saying such good things. So I want to thank you very much for your participation, and I hope that you left with some notes that in some ways might be usable as you continue or perhaps pursue some of your own mentoring relationships. So thanks for your time. I'm going to join you at lunch. I don't have bring lunch. So if you want to chat about anything, I'll be there.
Hey Mallory, can I talk to you about your film? No.
Did they assign people to that?
Dude, what's up, my guy? I see you in the gym. Where you at?
And then everybody else.
No walking.
8 buddies.
I'm not going any further. Wait for me! Team 14! District 14! Don't leave me! 14! I just worried just said 15. No, we're 14. We're 14! I thought you said 15. No, I said 14!
I refuse to get left.
We're not gonna leave you.
Thank you. That would be awkward.
We need to find some doors. Yeah.
Okay. Let's head on up out of here.
Let's go.
Hi, Naya.
Hi, Miles.
Why are you here?
I'm working.
By doing what? Sketchy stuff.
What?
Hi, Courtney.